we don't take up any more of your time. Everybody ready for the school year?
Yeah.
Yes.
Don't sound so enthusiastic. So, my name's Ken Peterson. You may call me Ken. I'm glad I'm not in this young lady's classroom this year. I know what kind of teacher she's going to be. I'm not putting up with anything. So, thank you for attending, by the way. You guys look like you've been attending these all week long. We'll get through this short and sweet, maybe half hour, maybe 45. I come from Minnesota and a company called Williams Sound. Does anybody, are you familiar with the induction loop system that we put in the classroom?
No.
I'm understanding that there really hasn't been a lot of explanation about that to this point. But River Terrace is really on the cutting edge right now. And we'll go into detail a little bit about what's under your feet and how we're going to be communicating with special needs kids with hearing problems. Right? So let's talk just real quick about who Williams Sound is. Williams Sound was started by this gentleman, Jerry Williams, in 1976. If you can't see over there, my apologies.
Can I help you move that? We can just.
Yeah, you want to?
Let's get it out of the way right now.
Let's get it out of the way. Let's not ruin the system. There we go.
Wiggle and wiggle. Just walk it. Look alive.
You can move this right up to my car if you like.
Can you guys
see a little bit better there? Okay, good. So Jerry Williams, he was a electrical engineer in Minnesota, and he worked for 3M. You've heard of 3M. In 1976, he's a very, very religious gentleman, and at his church with elderly people who had hearing problems, they asked him if there was something that they could do that could allow them to hear better. And he wound up importing these, do you remember the little transistor radios? Maybe some of us do, I say us, from China when you were a kid. And he imported those from China, fiddled with them, made one a transmitter, one a receiver, and he hooked it up to the PA system, and started handing out little transistor radios to people who couldn't hear. So they'd actually hear a little wireless transmission to the little Chinese transistor radio, and that became a thing. Jerry petitioned the FCC, and then later the Americans with Disabilities Act, as that was coming online. A lot of people think of ADA regulations as what? Wheelchair ramps, right? Accessibility. Touch, what am I trying to say here for the Braille? Braille, thank you. Well, there is also a law for accessibility for the hearing impaired. So any government center you walk into, any auditorium, your Redskins stadium, baseball stadium, Orioles, Redskins fan, if you have a hard time hearing the transmission, by law they have to be able to provide you with a belt pack. And that's transmitting out an FM frequency that's set aside by the FCC for sound enhancement, right? So that's who we are. That is the crux of what we do. We also do digital communications. But we do primarily systems for the hearing impaired people with special needs. We do that in a couple different technologies. I love this picture. She's so excited to hear. Very cool. Again, we started in 1976. Our factory is based in Minnesota. Thus my name, Kent Peterson, Johnson, Nelson, land of 10,000 Petersons. So we're very proud of what we do. There have been some great, I love these, found these out of a magazine, one on the right. Can you see that? Ear glasses. These are plastic cups that you wear. Nice fashion accessory, right? There have been a lot of improvements in hearing technology, and primarily the three systems we manufacture are FM, just like a radio station. At the PA system, we broadcast an FM signal. You wear a belt pack, you pick it up with headphones or earbuds, right? If you want to check that out in any public space, auditorium again, baseball park, doing hear something better, by law they need to do that. Does a school need to do that, follow ADA guidelines? It's a little bit of a gray area. Of course you do for wheelchair accessibility, etc. but the ADA looks upon hearing assistance as you are a nonprofit, so they don't put that burden on you. However, big exciting things here. We also do infrared systems. You guys are using an infrared system for your microphone. Have you got through that training yet? Okay. That is a light-based technology. You know when you point your remote at your TV? That's an infrared signal. So it's light-based. Underneath that wavelength of the light wavelength, we modulate a FM system. So it's kind of IR FM. But essentially it's light-based. So FM radio waves, IR is light waves. What we're going to be talking about most today are induction loop systems. A lot of people call them AFILs. You'll hear that term. Audio frequency induction loop system. Radio frequencies, we talked about this. It just really is just an antenna that broadcasts out to everybody. Think of a radio station in a car. You could have 1 million people without that speaking up on your radio station. IR, you need to have some type of panel. Sometimes you'll see a panel in a room. You see them a lot in courtrooms. And it has like a flashlight. It has what we call a Q pattern, where it has a pattern that it shines across the floor. The great thing about IR technology and in courtrooms is that it's completely private. You can walk into the next room because there's a wall there. It won't go through. FM, would it? Yeah. Yeah, probably. You could hear that broadcast maybe out in the parking lot. So in courtrooms, IR is king because it's completely confidential outside the room. Induction loop systems, and we'll get right to the meat here. Again, it's audio frequency induction loop systems. It works on the theory of magnetic induction. We'll just touch on that a little bit. We're not going to get too technical here. It's embraced in Europe and the UK. Induction loop technology is the oldest of all assistive listening technologies. You have some advocates out in the field saying, oh, it's brand new, and it's less expensive than other technologies. Well, the technology was invented in the 20s and 30s. It is really popular in Europe because it's mandated by law. If you are on the National Health Service in Europe and you need a hearing aid, it has what's called a T-coil inside of it. And we'll touch on that a little bit. T-coil stands for telephone coil. It goes way back to Bell Labs and Michael Faraday in the 1920s, 1930s. The installation can be installation intensive. As opposed to an FM system, we put a transmitter on a desk, put up an antenna, and everybody can hear it. An IR system, we put a panel on the wall, shines this light in the room. If you're within that light that you can't see, you can hear it. What we have to do with induction loop systems is we have to take up a floor and then make a matrix of copper through the floor. Think of radiant heating at home. Anybody have radiant heating? Kind of works the same way. Well, we do because I live in Minnesota. You almost need it there in your bathroom when it's 20 below outside, let me tell you. So of all the technologies, it can be a little bit installation intensive. Within each one of your rooms, you have this amplifier. Not much different than any amplifier you have at home. You're sending audio into it, and what would you hook up to an amplifier? Speakers, right? Instead of hooking up speakers to it, we're hooking up copper wiring. And this copper wiring is right underneath your feet. Makes a great bookmark. Makes a great, you can really make cool sculptures out of it. That's just wire. It's just wire encased in a plastic sheet. So we take the.
It's under your feet.
It's under your feet. So I want to caution you, if you're walking barefoot and you spill something, no, nothing will happen. We get that question a lot.
Is this the actual, is this the width, so it's more like a ribbon? I think of wire as being thin, so
That is actually it.
this is it.
Yep. If you look and the light is right, you can actually see the lines throughout the floor. So we're taking the microphone output from your infrared wireless microphone as you hold your microphone, It's sending an infrared signal to that eyeball right there. It's going through the wires, coming into your amplifier, and then it's sending it out to the speaker that is flat as that cable on the floor. We can't hear it because it's actually creating a magnetic wave, or a magnetic field. We'll take a look at the amplifier too. I encourage you to get up and take a look at it when we're done. As I mentioned, induction loop systems are the oldest of all assistive listening technologies. The way it works is the same principle. You know, you take two magnets and you push them together, they're either going to repel or they're going to attract, right? That is a field, and we can utilize that field to modulate it with audio frequencies. Can't hear it, but we can modulate that as a pitch goes up or a pitch goes down. So if you think of how this technology interacts, we're creating a magnetic field in the floor, right, one end of the magnet. And in a hearing aid, there is a little tiny, tiny coil of copper. It's exactly what it is. It's called a T-coil. Again, it comes from telephone coil. Because when it was invented, there was a speaker inside your earpiece, right? And that communicates to somebody's hearing aid with a T-coil in it. Makes a sympathetic magnetic connection. Patent office, kind of cool. June 30th, 1938. It was actually patented a little bit earlier, 37 in Great Britain, but there are some patents for magnetic induction going back in the 30s, or early 30s, late 20s. So, how it works, again, we're not going to get into too much detail, but if you think of a figure 8, or you think of hooking up a speaker, you have a positive and a negative, right? So you go positive out to the speaker, negative back to the amplifier. We go positive out, the electrons have a vector, and they come back negative to the amplifier. Maybe too much to think about. We call it the right hand rule. So if I'm standing over a flat wire going right here, put my thumb out, I go, oh, the electrons are flowing in that direction. And there is a flux, a magnetic flux that rolls around that wire in a barrel. So if we have a wire right here, we're in what's called half space. So if the wire is right there, we've got this arc coming up and coming right back down. I'm standing here, here's my right hand rule, the electrons are going that way, the magnetic flux is going that way. I know that's a little techy, that's as techy as we're going to get today. But you need to understand that for one particular reason. We'll talk about that right here. Here's a hearing aid. Here's that little T-coil in there. Now, statistically, T-coils are only in about 60 to 70% of hearing aids. If your uncle, your grandmother, your aunt went out and spent $6,000 for hearing aids because they're that tiny and they're in their ear and they're wearing a pendant, chances are that hearing aid is so small it can't fit a T-coil in. So what they do is they'll put a T-coil in a pendant and they'll communicate Bluetooth to the hearing aid digitally. However, this is how it looks in a typical hearing aid. All they do is they put a little coil of copper here, and they give it just a little bit of electricity by the battery. What's important to note is the orientation of the T-coil. It's vertical, correct? So if we think of this as a wire, and my chin's right on the floor, and I'm looking at that wire going this way, I'm looking at a cross-section of it going to the floor, my magnetic flux is traveling like that. And actually, I think I have an arrow here. So, our right-hand rule says the electrons are flying, going that way, and my electronic flux is rotating around that wire. Does everybody get that? Okay, good. The reason magnetic induction works in a T-coil is dependent on the orientation of that T-coil. Okay? And I'll explain here. As the magnetic flux goes around the cable, or it goes around the wire, that's cross-section, if it enters the T-coil perpendicular to the orientation of the T-coil, you get complete drop. You can think of it as an X. It's not going to work. If if the magnetic flux goes in the barrel of the T-coil, you get perfect coupling. So the way they orient a T-coil in a hearing aid is kind of offset. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. Now this is how this applies to you, and this is what's important. We did at 10, 15, 20 at Payne Elementary. Anybody familiar with Payne Elementary? And none of us went out there to talk a little bit about how T-coils work. And I've been hearing from people that there are dropouts, that there are problems with it, and that makes me feel sad. Because the inherent problem with the relationship of the magnetic flux in a T-coil is this. We do these in a lot of churches. If I'm standing right over a wire, that magnetic flux is coming into my T-coil sideways. I'm immediately right over a wire. So what happens is, if I step here, well, I can hear. If I walk here, the amplitude drops because it's entering that T-coil perpendicular. Are you with me? Does that make sense to everybody? So, in a room, if you are over a wire, and it's really only about that wide, you don't hear anything in your hearing aid. Go over here, oh, I can hear it now. Works, that's the way it works. That's the physics of the principle. What also happens is in churches, when you genuflect, when you bow, you're changing the orientation of that T-coil, and you get a complete dropout. So I get concerned when I hear that there are dropouts in an induction loop system without knowing the physics of that loop system. So how do we counteract that? There are ways we counteract it. We draw what's called a phased array. And I know it's difficult to see. You see a line here, a line here, a line here, a line here. So what you have in your classrooms are on one channel, a line here, on channel A, a line here, and a line here. If I activate that one channel, as I walk through the room, it's my hearing response is going to go down, up, down, up, down, up. It's going to be dropouts. So what we do is we offset that first channel with a second channel, and we bisect each area. So if I were to look at it independently, I'd see first channel down, up, second channel down, up, except you take that second channel and we tilt it 90 degrees electronically. Don't need to worry about that. But they don't interact with each other. So when I have a dropout here and a dropout here on one channel, a dropout on the second channel here, this one covers the dropout of the second channel. It's as techy as we're going to get. Okay? So what you wind up with is a really smooth coverage area with no dropouts as you walk through. Now what happens if you turn your head? Still get dropout.
So your body position is important.
Body position only with respect to bending over.
Okay.
You can spin, doesn't matter.
You're talking about listener though, not the speaker?
Listener.
That's only listener, right?
Mm-hmm. The thing you have to worry about with your microphone is because we know IR is light, tiny, tiny, tiny nanometer wavelength. If you're talking and your IR unit is right there and you go like this, you can get body shielding and that will drop out. Now the nice thing about light is it can reflect off of surfaces. That may not happen all the time. But if you're with your microphone, you walk over here, and then all of a sudden you reach up here, that can't see your microphone. So, with respect to the listener, you're right. Now, let's step back a little bit. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to ask, so the students who are in school without induction loop system, do their hearing aids, are they IR, are they RF? And is that a backup system for those downtimes, or does one overtake, does like the induction loop overtake the other two systems?
It doesn't, and you brought up exactly what I was going to talk about next. Thank you. When you look at a hearing aid, again, you only about 60 to 70% of hearing aids have T-coils in them. I suspect we have younger children. We know we have younger children, right? So nobody's getting $6,000, $8,000 hearing aids because their ears are going to grow. So they're going to be a little bit bigger. I should also say cochlear implants. We're familiar with those. We've heard them, right? It's amazing technology. I mean, actually, what they're doing is they're surgically going in and inserting a wire in the cochlea. And you have people now who've been completely deaf their whole life who can now hear. There's a couple of YouTubes on people hearing for the first time. And let me tell you what, you better get your Kleenex out because it's just an amazing thing. So the reason I bring up cochlear implants is if you have children with cochlear implants, you'll see a magnetic device here that is attached to their skull. They put metal magnets right in their skull, and then there's a wire that goes into their brain and into their cochlea. All cochlear implants have T-coils in them. So when we talk about cochlear implants and hearing aids, some hearing aids do have T-coils in them, some don't. The way you can check, for the most part, is on the hearing aid you'll have an M switch or a T switch. So if you want to check a child's, look at their hearing aid, if they're okay being touched. They'll either have an M or a T on there, M meaning microphone, T meaning T-coil, or they may have M and T, which engages their microphone and their T-coil. Okay, so as long as your induction loop system is working and their head is up, I mean, it can take some lean over, but if they're like this, they may not hear you right away.
Okay.
You may want to just touch them on the shoulder so you can get their chin up. Go ahead.
So if you move toward the door or into the restroom,
Yep.
is it still gonna pick up or are you out of range?
The IR system, if you are shielded by the doorway or the hallway or walking out the hallway, will not pick you up. Now we're talking about an input device. The microphone is an input device. This is an output device, is the induction loop. So, and we're going to touch on reception of the induction loop here in a second, and some of the pitfalls. Make sense to everybody? Why do people like T-coils? Any musicians in the house? Anybody here ever hear in-ear monitoring? It's what all the stars wear now. You know, it used to be on stage, you'd have these big wedges that would blow music back at you. Now everybody wears in-ears.
Oh, they're
So they can clear the stage, make it look a little nicer, and those musicians are hearing a stereo, beautiful stereo mix in their headphones. They don't have to go, can I hear more of myself, please? The engineer just dials in a little bit. The great thing about T-coils and hearing aids is if they switch it just to the T, they have a fully occluded ear canal. So it's just like wearing earplugs, and then they're hearing that audio signal supplied by you directly into their ear canal, regardless of room effect. A lot of hearing aid wearers suffer and complain about the fact that when it's in a microphone, microphones don't discriminate. They hear everything in the room. They hear your HVAC, hear it? And they're trying to discern language over that. And the microphone's picking up everything equally. They're hearing you shuffle paper. If they put it in a T-coil, all they're hearing is you talking. Of course, you need to use proper mic technique with your IR. Don't be afraid to pick up that microphone or get it close to you. But then you communicate right to the ear canal, including the ear canal, so it's wonderful. You okay? Did you bang your...
No.
Okay. I did that. Yeah.
Are there any benefits to using this for students who don't have hearing aids?
Not really, no. You need to have a T-coil. Now, we manufacture belt packs with a T-coil in them. So if the school district determines to get some belt packs, they just wear a belt pack and they can wear a little earbud or headphones or whatever they want to use that will help them hear better. If you have students who don't have a T-coil in their hearing aid, again, you can get a belt pack and maybe keep a couple in the office. And, but I encourage you to be engaged, right? I mean, what are we trying to do here? Communicate. It never ceases to amaze me. I was a consultant, acoustical consultant for over a decade, and it never ceases to amaze me. Acoustics in an auditorium, in a learning environment, or in a church whenever they get to the acoustical portion of it, or making the PA system better, or the assistive listening system better, what happens? Falls off the budget. And really, what are we doing in these spaces trying to deliver a message, right? So, as with any system, the more you're engaged with it, the more you know it's there, the more it'll get used and the better you'll communicate with people, kids with special needs. So, we're just going to touch on a couple of designs. Now, in a room this size, so we can do what's called a perimeter loop. I could line around here, and it's wide enough where I won't get a big dip in response. The problem with doing a perimeter loop is that you get bleed. Remember we talked about, if I'm walking through the room like this, talk about, whoop, goes out because I'm right over the wire, comes back in, and then drops right in the wire. So if I had a perimeter loop starting here and 4 feet from that wall, as I walk here, I get a drop out, and I walk over there, I get a drop out. The problem with a perimeter loop is that it has bleed outside the loop. Sometimes that spill can be the width of the room itself. So if we had a perimeter loop in this room, clearly be able to hear what's going on next door here and what's going on here. There's a perimeter loop over there and a perimeter loop over there, you hear what's going on there. Complete jumble wouldn't work very well. Thankfully, we know, it's just a little graphic, right? Everybody get that? Oh, look, spill. I can hear me in the other room. So we know how to design a little bit better now, and this is kind of indicative of what you have in your floor. Now we make these lines, you can see that they're separated, but they run parallel and about that wide, 2 lines. So we call this figures of 8s. We go down the room from the amplifier. And actually this room is oriented so that the loops are like this. This is 1 channel. What do we still have as we walk through the room? Dip, 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 dip. What we do is we lay that 2nd channel across, like we talked about. Red being, black being channel 1, red being channel 2. Sorry if you're colorblind. So as we walk through this room, we've got a great even frequency response. Now you notice that these 2 ends are a little shorter. It's called a cancellation loop. When we make these turns really tight in the room, what happens is we reduce spill left and right. We wind up with something more like this. Okay. Now herein lies the problem and why you guys are on the cutting edge. There is no way that you can stop that spill, no matter how tight we make these turns in the floor. You're gonna get some spill. I get a lot of calls from courts now, wanting an induction loop system. What's the problem with the court? We touched on it. Most of them are.
Oh, well, everyone can hear it outside of the,
With an FM system, absolutely. So FM systems are verboten. You know, if it's a lurid trial, you get the press outside just picking it up on their transmitters and hearing every detail. Especially when HIPAA comes involved and we talk about HIPAA laws. You cannot use an FM system in a courtroom. Consequently, you can never use an induction loop system in a courtroom that needs complete confidentiality. Some courtrooms don't care about it. Here is a case in particular. Judge's desk. Here is here's witness testimony. Here maybe the defendant. These are 2 courtrooms right next to each other. Domestic relations here in the room. Domestic relations here. I wanted to try this out because they wouldn't take no for an answer. They wanted an induction loop system. Well, if you have a defendant right here, you have a defendant right here, and they're this close to the wall, we can only stop that loop system by making those turns as tight as we can, as little or as much as we can. But if I'm sitting here, I'm more likely going to hear everything in that room. The exact same thing goes for your classrooms. I designed the loop systems for these rooms, so you have a really tight turn on channel 1 here, and a really tight turn on channel 2 here. So what you get is you get a little bit of a dip here, and then a little bit up, and then a dip here. But I went around and commissioned all the rooms yesterday and today, and if I have a hearing aid on, and I'm sitting right here, I can probably hear what's going on. And that's gonna go with every room that has an induction loop system, which I believe are all of the rooms. As I come into the room here, I can hear. So I've designed it so your peak performance is about right here to about right here. I've had to, because if I made smooth coverage through this room right to here, it's gonna dip in the other room right here, okay? So, a couple things to keep in mind here. We're at the end of it. Does that make sense to everybody? So the takeaways are this. If you have somebody with a hearing aid, what are we gonna look for on their hearing aid? You either have a T or an M, or an M and a T. Go
Does
ahead.
it matter on hearing aid with different settings? Does it matter which setting it's on?
It does not. When a person gets hearing aids dispensed from their audiologist, they'll look at their hearing curve and understand where they need a bump in frequency response or more volume in the low or the high. When I commission systems, we try to keep the audio response as flat as possible, so the hearing aid can do what it needs to do. But each kid or person with a hearing aid may experience that differently, right, depending on their hearing loss.
So if a hearing aid is a T-coil hearing aid, it's only T-coil, it doesn't have a setting we could change it to be a different mode?
Nope. If you have a hearing aid, all of them have a microphone. That's how they hear. About 60%, 70 of them have T-coils in them. So all hearing aids have microphones. Not all hearing aids have T-coils. If it has a microphone in it, they're just hearing you talk in the room, or what's coming through the speaker. If it has a T-coil on it, and you can talk to your parents about this. Does your child's hearing aid have a T-coil? I can bet you I know what they're gonna say. What? I have no idea what you're talking about. Can you check your child's hearing aid to see if it has a T or an M on it, or an M and a T? T, T-coil, M microphone, M and T, both the microphone and the T-coil working at the same time. So if you're having a little bit of a problem getting your students' attention, or maybe you want to communicate a little bit more directly, or maybe it's a problem student, maybe say, you know what, when you're in your classroom, give them a hug, click it over the T-coil. Now remember, when you click it over the T-coil, they're not going to hear any microphone in the room. They're hearing right in their hearing aid, and that's it. They're not hearing any room volume whatsoever. We want to keep it an M and T. But it's not going to do any good. The system isn't going to do any good for anybody without a T-coil in their hearing aid. My guess is most of your students do, probably closer to 80%.
That would be a question to ask the audiologist when they come on.
That's it,
Because
right?
normally the audiologist will go in and keep the earpieces clean and what have you. So that would be a